Here we go.
Are you confused about the distinctions between noir mystery and hard-boiled or soft-boiled? Is there any such thing as soft-boiled private investigator? We at Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime have good news for you. I'm Fedora Amos, president, and we are seeking answers through talks with working writers. So far, we've produced 4 interviews on mystery subgenres, classic or traditional, true crime, amateur sleuth, and suspense thriller. Well, I recently received results from a completely non-scientific poll. My responders were anything but typical. They came much closer to being the ideal. They were avid readers, mostly women, who buy books and love mysteries. I asked them to choose their favorite subgenres from 8 categories. The 4 already mentioned, plus private eye, historical, police procedural, and science fiction fantasy. Yes, the categories overlap, and yes, they're a bit arbitrary. We'd love to hear your suggestions and comments. Send them to Fedora at fedoraamos.com. Perhaps we should have fewer categories or more. Why? Because each year, so many books are produced. It's such a breakneck pace that we need more specific words to locate our preferences and to describe them to others, such as librarians and bookshop owners. Well, today we feature the PI category, private investigator. Here is Belk Library's definition of private eye. Soft-boiled or standard private eye writers include Walter Mosley, Sarah Paretsky, and Robert B. Parker. Some of these are hard-boiled with tough characters and violent action. Some are soft-boiled, featuring more psychology and less action. The PI typically has a license to practice and collects a fee. Noir is a classic that's dark and gritty, with private investigators equipped with their good old trench coat. Well, you can see that I'm very well equipped today. I have my 40s snazzy tie. I have my black fedora. And I have my Sam Spade, Mickey Spillane trench coat. Yeah, well, it's a little bit much. I think I'll take the trench coat off. That's better. But I still feel absolutely ready to do noir today. But I have a new definition. Traditional or soft-boiled private eye mysteries. Realistic crime fiction typified by objective viewpoint, impersonal tone, and understated style. The PI typically has a license to practice and collects a fee. He or she is often sought for cases that are either too small or too difficult and or delicate for authorities. Hard-boiled adds violent action, colloquial speech, that means you cuss a lot, and tough characters. Noir is yet another step in the dark and gritty underbelly of crime. Well, Gary and I are going to think about that and decide whether we think that's a good definition or if it should be changed too. Right now, we're going to explore the world of the private eye with Gary Miller. Are you surprised that we have men and women at Sisters in Crime? Well, we're not sexist. We welcome both sisters and misters. Gary Miller is a published author, poet, and editor who is presently developing 2 different crime novel series, one featuring 1950s private eye, Randall Murphy, the other featuring contemporary homicide detective, Ike Barney. A St. Louis area native and longtime Missouri resident, Gary also lived in the Colorado Rocky Mountains for 16 years, where he learned to write and worked as a park ranger with the National Park Service. A lot of crime there, I'm sure. Well, there probably is now, actually. He was mentored by award-winning writer and novelist Sandy Alt, creator of the Wild Mystery series. He was also co-founder of the Fall River Writers Group, Estes Park, and is a current member of the St. Louis chapter of Sisters in Crime. Life and work experiences plus a vivid imagination have inspired and continue to inspire the storylines and colorful characters that appear in Gary's novels, poems, and short stories. Upon retirement, Gary returned to his home state and now resides near family in the Missouri Ozarks, where he continues to write. His website is grmillerauthor.com. So, Gary, you took up writing in Colorado. Tell us about that.
That's basically where I learned to write. I got the yin, the desire to write after watching, or I'd read Michener Centennial, which was based in Estes Park, which is where I lived,
Oh,
and watched Jeremiah Johnson, and I thought, I can do something like this. And
sure.
so I sat down and started writing something. It was my family, loosely based on family history, but it was going to be a saga where my character came out to the Rocky Mountains after 1904. And that's where I got started. And I got so far into that, and then I saw an ad for a writing seminar, a weekend seminar. So I went down, I did that. And that just basically encouraged me to take more classes. I saw that there was a need for me to learn to write a little bit better. I so I had to develop my style, my voice, and so I got in touch with Sandy Alt with her classes, and that made a big difference. There was a lot of encouragement all the way around from her and fellow students. So that's where I got started. And once I got started, the words just started to flow. One of the things that Sandy professed was that writers write. We don't get bogged down by genre or any particular form of writing. We write. If something comes to mind, we sit down and write it. And that's what I did. And I started writing just about anything and everything.
That's a very good point. That genre to writers may not mean much, but it does mean a lot to marketers. And we write mysteries, and you do too, I know, because I've read a bunch of your stuff. How did it come to be that you settled on mysteries? And I know you've done other things too, poems and songs, and I don't know what all, but why mysteries especially?
I've always loved mysteries and thrillers, suspense stories that engage the reader's mind and encourage them to want to solve the mystery, the crime, whatever it happens to be. And they often include twists at the end, and that always intrigued me. So that's primarily where I focus as far as enjoy writing and also reading. I particularly love the private eye, the noir, because of the gritty first person voice that pretty much goes along with that genre. And I always enjoyed that. It was fun to write and fun to hear, fun to read.
So do you write every day?
No, I wish I did. Unfortunately, life has these little obstacles that keep throwing at you, but I write as often as I can. Yeah. I have a project that I'm working on, the Ike Barney, my first Ike Barney novel that I'm trying to get finished. So I get into that as often as I can. If something pops into my head, I'll sit down and play with it and see what happens.
So does that mean that you're a pantser? That is, you don't make a 30-page outline and then follow it to the letter, but just kind of go with the flow? How do you write?
I basically am a pantser. To paraphrase George R. Martin, there are two types of writers, the architect and the gardeners. Architects plan everything beforehand and know where each board, nail, wire, and pipe is to be placed in the structure before it begins. Gardeners take a seed and plant it, knowing what the seed is, but not how glorious it might become. So that's pretty much where I fit. I'm in the gardener, the pantser category. Uh, the novels that I've started, basically, I came up with an idea and who my protagonist was going to be. And from there, I got the opening and closing scenes in mind. And I sat down and wrote those. And then from there, it's a matter of sitting down with the protagonist and whoever happens to come along and join the story and fill in the middle So we sit down together and write it together.
Do you do much research?
Research is something that I do sometimes beforehand, but usually it's during the process. I'll run into a situation where my reality fiction is starting to turn into fantasy, and I think, well, put on the brakes. Let's fix this. Find out what the real story here is, and go back and find out what I need to know to make that story a little more authentic. Also, the research frequently triggers ideas as far as where that story is going to go next. So research is something that I do during the process, not so much beforehand. Pretty much a pantser style.
But what are your sources for research when you do any?
Internet, books, Google.
That's always a good place to start. So
I've
it's
got a
hard to
writer
trust
also.
everything that you find on the internet. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation and just stupidity out there.
So you research in more than one, if you are looking at a particular item, particular category, you research in more than one location, more than one site, and see what gels, what comes together, what matches, and then pretty much focus on that and go with that.
So it's a little like the journalist who needs to test his sources by having at least two. Is that where you're going with that?
Do more if you can,
Okay,
just to
okay.
get a consensus.
A consensus. Oh yeah, that would be a very good thing. What are your go-to sources for writing help if you need any?
As far as style and editing and that type of thing,
Uh-huh.
I am really happy with the critique group that I'm in right now. It's fellow Sync members, Sisters in Crime members, and they're really good writers as well as editors. And the way we hold our critique group, the way it functions, it's basically a gloves off kind of thing. If there's something that doesn't make any sense or that is creating a problem, creating questions, everybody is free to speak up about it. Everything that we do is always constructive criticism. It may not be what the writer wants to hear all the time, but it's constructive and it's something to think about. So that's my primary source is uh, my fellow critique members. But as far as grammar, things like that, I've got grammar manuals that I jump into from time to time just to clear my thought process. But the how-to books, as far as writers are concerned, I think this is my view, and I'm sure other writers will question it, but I don't want to get bogged down in the how-to books so much. I've read some, I've read several. One that really gelled with me was Stephen King's On Writing, because he didn't come across as being pretentious as far as this is how you're supposed to write kind of thing. It was basically, this is how I do it. This is what I like and don't like, but feel free to pick up your own voice, your own style, and go with it. And that's basically how he came across. He wasn't trying to tell you that this is the format you should use. This is what you have to do for each chapter. This is what you have to do here, here, here. He basically put it out that this is what I do. If you want to do it, that's fine. If not, find your voice and stick to it. And that's pretty much where I am. I think that too many writers can get bogged down into trying to create perfection based on all the information that they obtain from these how-to books, that they start to lose their creativity. So I don't want to lose that.
That's good advice. Do you have any other advice, by the way?
Everybody has opinions, right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. As far as a writer is concerned, if you're considering writing, I would say go for it. Don't think that you can't write. There's always room for improvement. That applies to basically everything that anybody wants to do. But as far as writing is concerned, if you have the itch, scratch. If it's poetry, if it's short stories, if it's novels, get in there and do it. If you feel you need help, seek help. But bottom line is go for it.
Well, you talked about your 50s PI character,
Mhm.
and I think you love him. Is he you?
Yeah, it was an odd event that brought him about. It was one of those things where I woke up in the middle of the night and I had this line in my head. It was a bastard of a week, just like all my weeks lately. And I thought, geez, that's a Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe line if I ever heard one. But, you know, where am I going to use that? How am I going to use that? And so that's how Murphy got evolved. And I've had a lot of fun with him. And most everybody that's read him enjoys Murphy as a character. He's flawed. He's not perfect, which is good in a character, particularly a private eye.
Are there other characteristics in Private Eyes that you say are sort of necessary, or at least the ideal, if you're going to write a Private Eye book? What should you include? A flawed character, you say? What else?
Well, private eyes typically are kind of loners, in my opinion. They are not above the law per se, but they know how to skirt it, to work around it. They're not bogged down by the law 100%. They don't want to violate the law per se, because that puts them in trouble. But they don't have all the restrictions that a police officer has. They can go out and do what they need to do and stay right on the borderline of the law without getting themselves into trouble. Occasionally that backfires and they get in a little trouble, but bottom line is, if they solve the case, then frequently that trouble gets overlooked. But they're kind of gritty characters. They do have flaws. They may or may not have a partner. That's not really anything that's important to them per se, I don't feel.
It seems to me that they often have somebody that is in real authority, a police person of some kind, because otherwise, how do they ever get into the justice thing, which is what's something mysteries are supposed to do, achieve justice?
Yeah, that's something that I've seen. And then my character is an ex-cop, and he's got a friend on the force who is his go-to guy. But there's also as many people, probably whole lot more people on the force that would just as soon spit on his grave rather than honor it. So, you know, he's got those people he has to deal with as well. But there's a law enforcement bond there. There's typically somebody on the force that they can refer to when they need to get information, and usually that's the time that they talk to him. Other than that, they leave him alone. Murphy's that way. He's always bothering his friend George Baker, who's a detective on the St. Louis police force, when he needs some special inside info.
Do you have any author role models? Because there are some very famous ones who wrote noir and hardboiled and whatever. Who is your ideal fictional character and your ideal writer that you sort of pattern yourself after? And I have a thing I want to say about that too.
When I started to get into this, I thought, well, I need to in order to get into the mood, I watched a lot of private eye movies back in the black and white era. But I really needed to get into the writing aspect. And so I focused on Chandler and Hammett, Spade and Marlowe, and to get the voice. And that's what I was looking for, is to get that voice and then create my character and reflecting that kind of voice, but with my idioms, my quirks, my one-liners.
Well, I'm so happy that you put Chandler first, because I think that you sound an awful lot like Raymond Chandler. And there are a whole lot of worse things to sound like than Raymond Chandler.
Yes.
He was one of the three of the original triumvirate of noir.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say anything about Ross MacDonald, but he's the third one that started writing in the 20s. Yeah.
I should read him. I haven't read
Yeah.
him.
Oh, yes. Let's see. The Dane Curves. I think that was
Yeah.
him.
I've
And of
read a
course,
lot of Robert B. Parker too, which was actually, he was one of Chandler's proteges, and he actually finished the last manuscript that Chandler started, but he passed away before this manuscript was finished, and Parker finished it for him. It
well,
was,
that's a pretty good legacy. Pretty
yes,
good.
yes. When you got that kind of a reference, that's pretty good going.
Absolutely. But of course, we can't overlook some of the earlier than that too, like, well, going way back, Edgar Allan Poe's Arsène Lupin, Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Mm-hmm.
But the most famous of them all, of course, has to be Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. What's your take on that?
I don't know. I guess I'm a U.S. citizen to the core. I'm not really into the British authors and characters as much. Not that I don't like them. I appreciate them. I've read some of the Sherlock Holmes novels, and enjoyed them. I've enjoyed it all, everything I've read, but I'm not quite into that as much.
Let's come up to Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot.
I've read Christie as well, and Poirot, and enjoyed that. The Orient Express, Murder on the Nile. Good stories, good stories.
Absolutely. And probably the most famous of the 50s writers, Mickey Spillane. What do you think of
Yes.
Mike Hammer?
Yes, indeed. I've read a number of his novels as well. And I think Murphy has got a little bit of Marlowe and Spade and Mike Hammer in him. I also got Janet Ivanovich. I've read a number of her novels, and her character, Stephanie Plum, is just a wreck on two legs. And Murphy reflects some of that kind of character as well.
Then we come up to the present, and we have like Sarah Peresky, V.I. Warshawski, and Kinsey Malone.
Read them.
Sue Grafton. Had trouble getting that out. What do you think of those lady private eyes?
I don't have any problems with that. With the females, they're, why not? Back in my characters in Murphy's era, why they were all, it was basically men did everything and women didn't do anything but stay at home. Today, that's not the case. So why not? There's female investigators out there that are every bit as qualified and every bit as interesting as far as being a private eye.
And Easy Rollins in LA.
Yep.
Walter Mosley.
Yes.
I love that. Devil in a Blue Dress is one of my favorites.
Yes.
And it's harkening back the way your books do, harkening back to a different time, post World War II. Very interesting kind of a history there of private eyes. Well,
yeah, I guess pleased, I don't know, but surprised more than anything else to think that I was writing historical fiction as well as noir fiction based on the era that I've placed Murphy in.
yes, well, it's getting shorter and shorter. It's now 50 years, and soon it'll be yesterday, I imagine. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, it's about all the time that we have, and I want to ask you to watch again next time, where we do historical mysteries with Joe Allison, who has a number of historical mysteries set in St. Louis. We're going to have a good time then too. Thank you so much, Gary. It's been a lot of fun. I love to talk about private eye people, as you probably can tell.
Me too.